It always begins with confidence. Clear skies, engines humming, crews relaxed but alert, fingers resting close to triggers that have already seen too much war. On the morning of July 25, 1944, above the green fields of Normandy, American anti-aircraft gunners believed they knew exactly what they were looking at. Distant shapes appeared against the pale blue sky, dark silhouettes moving fast and steady. Someone called out bearings. Someone else confirmed altitude. The guns rotated smoothly, almost calmly. In those few seconds, no one imagined the truth that would follow. By the time the realization hit, it would already be too late. Friendly fire is one of war's quiet horrors. It does not roar like an enemy attack. It creeps in through confusion, pressure, and split-second judgment. World War II was filled with moments when men were forced to decide in seconds, with lives hanging on a silhouette, a sound, or a radio message that arrived too late. For American gunners tasked with defending troops from air attack, the fear of hesitation was as powerful as the fear of mistake. Hesitate, and enemy bombers could tear through infantry columns. Fire too quickly, and the unthinkable could happen. In 1943 and 1944, American forces learned this lesson the hard way. As Allied air power grew massive, skies became crowded. Fighters, bombers, reconnaissance planes, and transport aircraft often shared the same airspace. Identification systems existed, but they were far from perfect. Paint schemes changed. Aircraft silhouettes looked similar at a distance. Smoke, clouds, sun glare and battle stress distorted perception. For the men on the ground, often young and exhausted, every approaching aircraft felt like a threat. On July 25, 1944, during Operation Cobra, the Americans launched a massive bombing campaign to break German defences near Saint-Lô. The plan depended on precise coordination between ground forces and the 8th Air Force. Heavy bombers were to strike just ahead of US infantry lines. The margin for error was thin. That morning, low clouds forced bombers to approach from unexpected angles. Bomb runs were delayed. Formations drifted. On the ground, American anti-aircraft units were on edge. German fighters had attacked supply lines days earlier. Orders were clear. Be ready. As bomber formations appeared, some gunners saw planes approaching from the wrong direction. Others noticed bombs falling short. In the chaos, communication broke down. Some gunners believed German aircraft were diving toward American positions. Without confirmation, guns opened fire. The first rounds tore into the sky before anyone could stop them. Tracer fire climbed upward, bright and deadly. Almost instantly, someone shouted that the planes were American, but the sound of the guns drowned out voices. Once a battery began firing, stopping it was not easy. Muscle memory took over. Training replaced thought. In the sky, bombers were already taking hits. The result was devastating. Dozens of American soldiers were killed by their own bombers that day, including Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair, one of the highest-ranking officers to die in the war. Though the bombing error was the main cause, anti-aircraft fire added to the confusion and danger. For the gunners who fired those rounds, the realization would come later, slowly, painfully. They had aimed at friendly planes. This was not an isolated incident. Earlier, on July 10, 1943, during the invasion of Sicily, American paratroopers experienced one of the worst friendly fire disasters of the war. That night, hundreds of C-47 transport planes carried airborne troops toward drop zones. The crews flew low and slow, silhouetted against flares, fires and tracer fire from naval battles along the coast. American naval gunners, already shaken by a German air raid earlier that evening, saw aircraft approaching from the sea. Nervous fingers tightened. Someone shouted a warning. Someone else yelled that they were enemy planes. In seconds, ships and coastal batteries opened fire. Tracers filled the night sky. Planes burst into flames. Paratroopers jumped early or died inside burning aircraft. By the time orders to cease fire spread, it was over. At least 23 transport planes were destroyed. Hundreds of American paratroopers were killed or wounded. Survivors later described the horror of realizing they were under fire from their own side. On the ground and at sea, gunners stared into the dark sky, sick with understanding. They had done exactly what they were trained to do, and it had gone terribly wrong. These moments haunted the men involved. Anti-aircraft gunners were not careless or cruel. Most were barely in their 20s. They trained endlessly to recognize aircraft shapes, engine sounds, and flight patterns. But training did not prepare them for the chaos of real combat. At night, with adrenaline flooding the body, the difference between friend and enemy could vanish in an instant. In the Pacific Theatre, similar tragedies occurred. On June 5, 1944, during operations around New Guinea, American aircraft returning from missions sometimes flew through areas where ground units had not been informed. Jungle terrain, limited visibility. Radios failed. When planes appeared suddenly, ground gunners reacted on instinct. Later, wreckage would be found with American markings still visible. One veteran gunner later said the worst sound he ever heard was silence after firing stopped. No cheering, no relief. Just the slow understanding that the target had not been the enemy. That silence followed many friendly fire incidents. Officers tried to comfort crews, reminding them that war was confusion and mistakes were inevitable. But for the men who pulled the triggers, those words never erased the memory. The US military responded by trying to improve identification systems. Aircraft were given larger invasion stripes. New recognition signals were introduced. Training emphasized restraint as much as aggression. But even with improvements, the problem never disappeared. War moved too fast. Information lagged. Fear always arrived before clarity. By late 1944, as American forces pushed into France and Germany, skies grew even more crowded. Fighter bombers roamed freely, attacking targets of opportunity. Anti-aircraft units struggled to track who was where. On several occasions, during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, American aircraft were fired upon by friendly ground units during sudden weather clearings. Men who had been under artillery fire for days reacted instantly to any sound from above. One incident near Bastogne involved P-47 Thunderbolts returning from a ground attack mission. Low clouds forced them down to treetop level. A nervous infantry unit, expecting German fighters, opened fire. One plane was damaged but managed to land. When the pilot climbed out, shaking and furious, the soldiers stared at him in disbelief. They had not known. No one had told them. These moments rarely made headlines. Official reports were brief, careful, often vague. No army liked to admit killing its own men. But among veterans, the stories circulated quietly. They spoke of shapes in the sky, of orders shouted too late, of the sick feeling that followed. Friendly fire did not come from hatred. It came from fear, pressure, and the demand to act without hesitation. Anti-aircraft gunners lived with that pressure every day. Miss once, and the enemy could destroy a convoy, a bridge, a hospital. Fire once in error, and you might kill the men you were sworn to protect. As World War II dragged on, these lessons became part of the unspoken weight carried by those who served. Every gun crew remembered at least one moment when they hesitated or wished they had. Every pilot feared ground fire, even from friendly lines. Trust existed, but it was fragile. The skies over Europe and the Pacific were not just battlefields between nations. They were spaces of confusion crossed by courage and mistake in equal measure. And for the American gunners who realized too late that their guns were aimed at friendly planes, the war never truly ended when the shooting stopped. For many American gunners, the worst part did not happen in the moment of firing. It came afterward, when the sky cleared, when reports arrived, when names were read aloud. In camps and gun pits across Europe and the Pacific, men learned that aircraft they had tracked, fired on, or even celebrated shooting down, had been carrying their own countrymen. No enemy interrogation could ever be harsher than that knowledge. The war forced them to live with it in silence. One such incident unfolded in southern France on August 15, 1944, during Operation Dragoon. As Allied forces landed along the Mediterranean coast, American and British aircraft filled the air. Fighter bombers attacked roads and rail lines while transport planes brought in supplies. Anti-aircraft units were scattered along the beaches and inland hills, operating under fragmented radio contact. That afternoon, a group of American B-26 Marauders appeared lower than expected, lining up for a bombing run against German positions inland. From the ground, the approach looked wrong. The angle, the altitude, the direction. A lieutenant in charge of an anti-aircraft section hesitated for a few seconds, then gave the order to fire. He would later say those seconds felt longer than his entire life. Tracer rounds rose toward the bombers. One aircraft was hit, its engine smoking. The formation broke apart. Only later did confirmation arrive that the bombers were friendly and already under strain from navigation errors. The lieutenant was relieved of duty, not as punishment, but because he could no longer function. His hands shook. He could not sleep. Command understood something important by that stage of the war. Friendly fire did not always come from incompetence. Often it came from men pushed beyond human limits. Pilots carried their own fear of friendly guns. American flyers learned quickly that flying low over friendly territory could be just as dangerous as flying over enemy lines. Many pilots began altering routes to avoid known anti-aircraft positions. Some fired recognition flares constantly, even when it revealed their location. Others trusted luck and speed. One P-51 Mustang pilot later recalled flying back from a mission over Germany in early 1945. Fuel was low, weather was poor. He descended through cloud cover and suddenly saw muzzle flashes from below. He rocked his wings hard, flashing invasion stripes, praying someone would notice. Tracers passed under his wings. Only when he climbed sharply did the fire stop. When he landed, shaken and furious, he learned the gunners had received no notice of returning aircraft due to a radio failure. The pressure on ground crews was relentless. Anti-aircraft units, often aircraft, operated independently, guarding bridges, depots, or troop concentrations. They worked long hours, often under threat of sudden air attack. German pilots sometimes exploited this, flying captured Allied aircraft or approaching from angles that mimicked friendly patterns. Every warning drilled into American gunners emphasized speed over certainty. Seconds mattered. Missed opportunities could cost hundreds of lives. This environment made mistakes almost unavoidable. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, weather grounded Allied aircraft for days. When skies finally cleared, American planes surged forward in massive numbers. Ground troops, exhausted and battered by weeks of artillery and cold, were jumpy. Several friendly aircraft were damaged or destroyed by American fire in those first clear days. Reports describe confusion, misidentification, and panic-driven reactions. In one case, near Houffalize, a group of American infantrymen fired small arms at low-flying planes, believing them to be German. The planes were P-47s attacking nearby enemy armor. One aircraft crashed behind American lines. The pilot survived, injured and furious. Later, when tempers cooled, apologies were exchanged quietly. No one was punished. Everyone understood how close fear had come to reason. By early 1945, the U.S. Army Air Forces and ground commanders began working more closely to reduce these incidents. Communication improved. Flight schedules were shared more widely. Recognition panels, smoke signals, and standardized approach routes were emphasized. But war was nearing its end, and lessons learned came too late for many. The emotional cost of friendly fire lingered long after victory. Veterans rarely spoke about these incidents openly. When they did, their voices softened. Stories were told without drama, often with long pauses. Many said the same thing. They remembered the moment of realization more clearly than any battle. One former gunner described it as a weight dropping into his chest. He said he replayed the scene for decades, wondering if a different angle, a few more seconds, or one louder shout could have changed everything. He never knew the names of the men in the aircraft he fired at. He only knew they were American. Historians estimate that thousands of Allied casualties during World War II were caused by friendly fire, many involving aircraft. Exact numbers are impossible to confirm. Records were incomplete. Incidents were underreported. Shame and grief kept many stories buried, but the impact shaped modern military doctrine in lasting ways. After the war, armed forces around the world studied these failures closely. Identification. Friend or foe systems were improved. Radar integration increased. Communication protocols became more rigid. Today's militaries rely heavily on technology to prevent the kind of confusion that plagued World War II. But even now, friendly fire has not been eliminated. The human factor remains. What makes these World War II incidents so powerful is not just the tragedy, but the humanity within them. These were not careless men. They were soldiers and airmen doing their best under impossible conditions. They acted with the information they had, in moments where hesitation could mean disaster. The skies of World War II were crowded, chaotic, and unforgiving. Every aircraft was both a symbol of hope and a potential threat. For American gunners, the responsibility was crushing. Protect your own. Stop the enemy. Decide fast. Live with the outcome. When they realized too late that their guns were aimed at friendly planes, time seemed to slow, then shatter. In that instant, the war showed its cruelest face. Not enemy against enemy, but brother against brother, bound by confusion rather than hatred. These stories matter because they remind us that war is not a clean line between good and evil, victory and defeat. It is a storm of noise, fear, and flawed human judgment. The men who lived through these moments carried them quietly, often alone, long after parades ended and medals were put away. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, peace did not erase memory. Somewhere a gunner still looked up when he heard an engine overhead. Somewhere a pilot still flinched at ground fire, even in training. The war stayed with them, written not in headlines, but in moments they wished they could undo. And that is the final truth of these incidents. Not just that mistakes happened, but that ordinary men were asked to make impossible choices in seconds. When American gunners realized too late they were aimed at friendly planes, they learned a lesson written in regret, one that echoes through every modern battlefield to this day. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.